Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? Not the worst, but one that sticks out that they did to themselves. Woman shows up to court in a "It's party time bitches. Drink up" t-shirt. She was there for her first appearance on a third DUI charge. Judge was not in a humorous mood that day. Not my case, but still my favorite story. Dude screwed himself over when he went to jury trial for a burglary charge and wore the same distinct sweatshirt he wore the night he committed the crime. Kind of hard to argue the guy in the video isn't your client at that point. Needless to say, he was convicted and spent a few years in dock. More of a case of screwing himself over, but here goes. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. 30-year-old defendant was charged with sexual assault of a child after he got his girlfriend's 14-year-old sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise, defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation, prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial on punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have the jury set punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensual, aside from not being old enough to consent, sex with the defendant, getting pregnant, etc. Paternity test introduced. Defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he forcibly had sex with her against her will. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that's the story he settled on. The jury deliberated about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years, the maximum possible as charged was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again. Teresa, lawyer in my town who has a reputation for being a real dick. He left a very successful firm to go off on his own. He and the firm negotiated which clients he would take, and how eventual fees from those clients would be divided. All seemed fine and dandy. As soon as he's out the door, he sues his old firm saying the deal is unenforceable and that he should 100% of the fees from the clients who came with him. He lost, and appealed, lost again and appealed to the state Supreme Court, where they shut his ass down and, in extremely diplomatic language, pretty much called him a dick. Not a lawyer, but when my Phil and Mel got divorced, she wanted to file jointly for the previous year because they were still married. They would have gotten a decent refund. He insisted on filing separately, despite the fact that he would owe $4,000, because he wanted her to also owe the IRS. He did it to frost her ass. Sitting waiting for my client and the judge is giving a mass colloquy for an alternative program on a DUI. Basically probation. Question: has anyone consumed alcohol or taken drugs in the last 24 hours? Obvious answer aside, one dude proudly raises his hand. I smoked some dope last night. He did not get probation. One time, I saw an indigent defendant who was in custody tell the judge his public defender wasn't working hard enough and he wanted the judge to appoint different counsel. The judge asked him what specifically was the problem and he said, "I don't want a female lawyer. I need a man who can take charge and fight for me," or something very similar to that. The judge, also female, said that's not how it works. Then he's starting yelling and getting into specifics about his public defender, just mainly "I don't like her, she won't visit me," etc. The judge is annoyed and looks at him and is like, "Fine, I'll appoint another attorney for you. But because you are not satisfied with your attorney and I need time to appoint you new counsel, I am not going to hear any other issues today and will reset your case." A few days later the judge sends defendant notice of his new appointed attorney, who happens to also be female, and notice of the case reset for 6 weeks. The case was originally set for a bond hearing and Ada and his PD had agreed to release him on an unsecured bond, meaning he would have gotten out that day, if he hadn't thrown his temper tantrum. Instead he waited another 6 weeks in jail just to have another female attorney represent. A wife filed for a restraining order because she wanted the house during divorce. Husband has good job, like $200K per year. Employer finds out about restraining order, husband is fired. He was very specialized employee, so only job he can find close to house, ex-wife, and daughter is $50K. House gets foreclosed. Child support at less than $500 per month. Wife has to get job as waitress. 4 cars get repossessed. I've seen a parent use non-existent discipline as a tool to win over their teenage child, so that the child will choose to live with said rubbish parent, and rubbish parent will receive child support from the other parent. It boils my blood seeing someone allowing their 15-year-old child to drop out of school, get high every day, buy them drugs, alcohol, just about every negative thing you could do to a kid, just so they don't have to pay $100 in child support a month. Edit: for everyone commenting on the fact that the child support payments were so cheap, child support amounts in my jurisdiction are relative based upon the paying parenting situation, income, schooling, assets, etc. They were deadbeats, part-time under-the-table seasonal employment and government welfare. Kind of a self-screw, but them entered DVD John's code for breaking DVD copy protection as part of their lawsuit into their evidence, which then became public record. The code that breaks DVD copy protection was now available to the entire world, defeating the entire purpose of their lawsuit. Was involved in a custody case where a wife cheated on her husband and had a child as a result. She let husband believe the child was his until she was about 5 years old and they were divorcing. To stop him from getting custody, she convinced the biological father to try to get custody, thinking that if he won she would wind up with the child. Became a huge 3-way fight, multiple sets of grandparents involved, attorney's fees skyrocketed because the case would have been pretty quick otherwise. She couldn't pay her attorney, tried to get the bio dad too, got even messier, etc. Basically there still isn't an agreement all parties will follow. They are in and out of court every year or so. She screwed herself. This wasn't my case but followed it closely because it was an acquaintance's divorce proceedings. He and his now ex-wife shared some commercial property that was worth some dough. They were both on the paperwork, access to the same info. Well, some shit hit the fan and the property was in arrears and I think some lien was filed. The husband would try to talk to his then wife about the whole thing and she would blow him off. Not only would she ignore him and the finances, she started cheating on him. Fast forward to divorce. It's contentious and they get down to fighting for the primary residence whose market value, unencumbered, is much less than the commercial building. She demanded the house and the husband effectively offered to give her the commercial building if he could keep the residence. She never paid attention to how bad off the commercial building was, and for some strange reason her lawyer didn't do any due diligence, so they took the deal. I don't know if the asset allocation included any saving conditions or caveats for the ex-wife, but I did like to see that her own disinterest may have led to bargaining for an underwater property instead of a paid-off house. I have been in dispute with British Gas for around 10 years. Every now and again they take me to court. Every time I win and we go away for another few years. The last time I lawyered up, it's in a magistrate's even though it's a civil matter. My solicitor waited for the British Gas guy to swear his oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, etc. Then asked him what he knew of the previous court cases. When the guy said he didn't know anything about them, my solicitor ripped into him saying he'd just claimed to tell the whole truth, so clearly nothing he says can be trusted. It went on for a few minutes. It was kind of brutal. The magistrates agreed and we walked away with $600 in costs. It was a joy to watch this bloke who was all, "We're coming to make entry to your house and the police will help," before we went and be told to sit down and not say anything else unless he was asked a question. To fend off some of the questions, it's to do with a disconnected meter at my house, for electric to a closed shop. I have written to the CEO. I've had my MP involved and been to court 4 times. British Gas don't change, don't listen, so I've given up. I'll just go to court every now and again and claim my $600. Edit: I just remembered, They had to transfer the money electronically as we were going to send the bailiffs in, as they took 27 days to pay. TBH, I was a little disappointed when they paid up. I am being sparse on details here due to confidentiality, but I had a client who was accused of a very nasty sexual offense. He had an alibi. He was at work, where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, and around the time when I need to send in an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I am being careful, so I call the employee up again. Turns out my client fired him in the interim, and so the employee quite candidly tells me, "Oh, yeah, he was definitely at work. But that's not what I'll say in court. Duck that guy, he is going down." I did not call him as a witness, or file the alibi notice. Still won the trial, but if I hadn't thought to call the guy, or if he'd been less candid, my client would have been fucked hard. Sex offender registry, jail time, the works. Completely innocent.